Hello, everyone. So nice to see everybody. Really, I need this today. I think often of the verse in Psalms, Lule Toratcha shuai azavadati ba'ani. If not for your Torah, my delight, my plaything, then I would be lost in my sorrows. And we have a tradition that King David spoke those words, right? That as he looked around at the turmoil in the world, turmoil that he was engaged in, and yeah, it's an articulation of one thing that Torah can be, which is a kind of a balm or distraction even. Yeah, so I'm grateful for that, and we're gonna have some fun today. And Torah will be a delight. But of course, Torah is more than that, and I'm so conscious of what's happening right now in Israel and the Palestinian territories, and I don't have anything wise to say about it. Our friend Rabbi Brous does, and I would recommend her her sermon this past Shabbat. She's one of the few voices that I can sort of tolerate right now on this. It's hard to say anything wise, but I think she really did. I don't have anything wise to say about this, but I do think that Torah is one of the other things that it can be is a kind of an opportunity for us to have a conversation about our values and our ethics without having to offer direct commentary on the world. There's actually something valuable about there's a remove, a one step of remove that Torah can have, because we're going to talk about the story in the Torah, the Exodus story, and through that we're going to think about, in this case, we're going to think about structures of power and the balance between justice and mercy, right? That's a valuable thing for us to do, I think, right now. Just to think about those things, and Torah, I think, offers a space to do that, at a remove a little bit, to just be in our familiar story instead of having to be in the story that is unfolding that none of us really have the correct interpretation of. Okay, so let's say a blessing and get into our work for today. Blessing over Torah study. Thank God for Torah study. I hope you all thanked God for the Torah on Shavuot and received some kind of revelation. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, I said we're going to have some fun today, and we are, because we're going to do, this is like Parshanut-wise, which is the subject matter of this class, in terms of the methods of interpreting the Torah and commenting on the Torah. What we're going to do is there's a particular kind of game that one can play following the commentary of Rashi around the Torah, because it is a masterpiece, and it's constructed in such a way that you can see Rashi thinking the same thing across the Torah, or thinking something later that has to account for an earlier thought. And there's a kind of a web of narrative that Rashi, remember, Rashi is our most famous commentator, but his major project was to sift through the whole corpus of earlier rabbinic material and to pick out of the many legends that have been told to amplify the story of the Torah. Rashi picked out the ones that he felt fit the story best, and he tries in a certain way to keep it consistent. So Rashi in some ways builds like kind of a backstory to the Torah. There's like a second Torah now, Rashi's Torah, that we have to learn. And we're going to take a look at sort of the way that works by a certain method of following Rashi's commentary one to another, hopping across the Torah. So hopefully that will be fun, and it will be a little bit like an investigation, a kind of a detective story. We're going to try to find the identity of certain figures, the Nisi'im, the princes who appear in this week's Torah reading, which is called Naso. Naso is like raise up the heads of the children of Israel, but the Nasi'im, it's the same language, are the people who are raised up, the heads, the leaders, or we sometimes say, and I like this language, the princes. Okay, so the princes of Israel. We'll see them in a second. And then, as I said, along the way, we're going to see a lot of discussion. Rashi is working a narrative, but is holding all of the legal structure of Jewish tradition in his mind. He also commented on the entire Talmud. Kind of an impressive guy, and one wonders, like what am I doing? But Rashi also commented on the entire Talmud, and so he has a sense of the entire justice system. And you're going to see him sort of offering theories of justice, theories of power as we move through as well. Okay, so that's teaser. Let's get into it, and we're going to start just in a Parshanut way, with a classic question. Let's say it like a game show. What's bothering Rashi, right? Because it's a little bit like a game show where Rashi says something. There's a presumption that Rashi is answering a question that he doesn't, like what's the word? A kind of presumed question that he has in the text that's unspoken, but he's answering some problem in the text. So let's see if you can spot the problem in this. First, did I give you the link already? Here it is again, if I didn't. Okay, so let's see if we can spot the problem. This is early on in our Parsha, and we kind of get the naming of these princes who are to come forth. We're in the book of Numbers now, and the whole of beginning of the book of Numbers is a census, and there's like a census and marching, and it's like there's some sort of like legions of Israel come forth and be counted, and it seems like it's related to war because it's fighting men that are counted, but it also is very ceremonial, and as part of the ceremony, there's a representative from each of the tribes. So head, leader, prince, whatever, we're gonna call it prince. Let's take a look. Here we go. Okay. So, here we go. On the day that Moses finished setting up the tabernacle. Okay. So this is a kind of a rewind, actually, because we've just had the book of, let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Is that better? It's not working. We've just had the book of Leviticus, which was a kind of a pause where we got all of these laws. But if we remember and go back to the end of Exodus, they were just finishing the tabernacle. So it's finished, and now there's a ceremony, a great ceremony on the day that it's finished. So on the day that Moses finished setting up the tabernacle, he anointed and consecrated it and all its furnishings, as well as the altar and its utensils. And when he had anointed and consecrated them, so when the ceremony is beginning, here's the verse that Rashi is going to could find some trouble in. The princes of Israel, the heads of ancestral houses, drew near. They were the princes of the tribes, those who stood for the roll call. Okay? Vayakrivu nisiei Israel, Roshei Beit Avotam, hem nisiei hamatot, hem haomdim al hapkudim, and brought forth their offering before the Eternal. That's one of the things they do, is they come forth and they bring the offering on behalf of the tribe. Now, what all together now, game show style, what's bothering Rashi? What's bothering Rashi in this? And if you have some familiarity with Torah interpretation, you'll know that one of the most common presumptions of interpretation, in other words, hermeneutical principles in our tradition, is that you don't have extra words. Okay, the Torah speaks efficiently, right? So I've basically given it away. What is the extra here? What's bothering Rashi? Someone, you get 50 points right now. 150 points right now.
It repeats princes twice.
Oh, 150 points to Hannah Jensen. That's correct. That's what's bothering Rashi. Rashi's not going to like this. If you know Rashi, if we knew him, we'd be like, uh-oh. I hope Rashi didn't hear the Torah say the princes of Israel, the heads of ancestral houses drew near. They were the princes of the tribes. You had to tell me princes twice? And if they were the princes of the tribes, they were the princes of Israel. Isn't that the same thing?
I was thinking, why is it using those two separate words to say the heads of the tribes. It says Nasiei Yisrael twice, and it says Rosh Beit Avotam. It could have just said the Rosh, the head of the tribes.
Yeah. Good. Okay, Noah's just making the problem more like even more troubling, because it's the princes of Israel who were the heads of the ancestral houses, who were the princes of the tribe. Like the whole sentence is they were the heads of the heads of the heads, and they headed the head and the head and the ancestral and the house and the tribe, and it's just like too much. Why is the Torah talking that way? Must be is another kind of hermeneutical principle here. Must be the Torah is telling us something, pointing us somewhere, alerting us to something. No, they were the princes of the tribes. And in this case, the way Rashi is going to read that, I realized, after I looked at, I went and I looked at his source, I realized the way he's going to read that is they were the heads before it was Israel, when they were just like tribes, right? Okay, so let's take a look at what Rashi says here. Let's take a look. Okay. They were the princes of the tribes. In other words, says Rashi, and there's a leap he's going to make here, but we'll be careful and look at it carefully. They were the officers over them in Egypt. They were the princes of the tribe. They were the officers over them in Egypt. And then Rashi goes on to say, and this is actually going to be the thing that is most important to us in this whole investigation, is this particular image here. And they were beaten on account of the people. As it says in Exodus 5:14, the officers of the children of Israel were beaten. We're soon going to take a look at this, for sure. This is the most interesting thing to us. What is the relevance of this? But first, let's understand this part, the first part, because there's a move here that Rashi makes, and you have to allow Rashi to make it for the rest of this to work, which is that they were the heads of the tribes, hem nisiei matot. And what Rashi is saying is the emphasis on they were the heads. They were the heads. They were the ones leading. They were the leaders. Remember the leaders. Oh, who was a leader back in Egypt? Right? That's actually a good question. They didn't have leaders back then. They were slaves. They were slaves, but they also had little princes in every one of the villages. Right? There's no sense of leadership. It's a people entirely subjugated and demoralized. But Rashi says there was one position of leadership in ancient Egypt, and that was shotrim, the officers, shotrim. And we're going to go see them. Now, the word, I must say, shoter or shotrim, in modern Hebrew, we say police. And, that's one way of translating this. I certainly didn't want to translate it that way for the purposes of this class, because it would be too much of an overlay. I do think that it's worth thinking about the role shoter in this story, and thinking about how does it fit into the scheme of power, in the hierarchy of power. But I mean, to translate it directly as police, and then we'd be talking about is police, but we can think about that, because the word is like officer. Famously in the book of Deuteronomy, the Parshat Shoftim begins, Shoftim v'shotrim titnu lecha b'chol sha'arecha. You should appoint judges and officers, meaning administrators of justice. And the commentators understand probably by force. And police is not a bad translation. I had someone earlier in this year when there was the discussion around policing really began growing in this country. And someone asked me, do they have, what's the Jewish critique on policing? And actually the way that he asked me the question was policing and prisons. And I was like, I'll tell you, ancient Judaism doesn't really have the concept of prison, our concept of prison. You could make a very strong critique on prison, but I said police seem to be a part of the ancients, so the idea of there shouldn't be. Seems like there's some assumption of something like an officer. That was a little bit of a tangent, but I just want to explain that this word shoter is it's not clear exactly what it is, but it's some enforcer. Okay, and so Rashi says the heads or the leaders of the tribes were the officers of the tribes in Egypt, and they were beaten on account of the people. Okay, now this is what we're going to go look at, and I really want to look at it in full, but let's look quickly just at the paragraph that Rashi is mentioning. The taskmasters and officers of the people went out and said to the people, "Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you any straw. You must go and get the straw yourselves whenever you can find it, but there shall be no decrease whatever in your work." Then the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. And the taskmasters pressed them, saying, "You must complete the same work assignment each day as when you had straw." And the officers of the Israelites, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten. Why, they were asked, did you not complete the prescribed amount of bricks either yesterday or today as you did before? Okay, so now you sort of see, we're going to begin. I want to pan out even further and look at the whole power structure there in Egypt. But now you have a taste of it, right? Which is, these are the people who are interacting with the taskmasters who are above them, and they are the ones being punished for the failure to deliver on the demands of the pharaohs above the taskmasters. They are the ones beaten, I guess, instead of the people themselves. Okay, that's the image. That's the moment that we're going to be carrying with us throughout this investigation. Now let's begin to interpret. Why does that matter? Why did Rashi say that? Why is Rashi telling us, no, those were the shotrim. They were the officers back then. And they were beaten, actually. Why does that matter to us? Why are we're talking about that? I see Florine and Yonatan. Florine, you have an answer to this?
No, my first point is the word prince. It really bothers me. I can understand the word leader, head, maybe officer, but the word prince implies a lineal background, and I've never heard that they were in some form of lineage. Okay, so
yeah, the answer is fair enough, and we can totally throw that out. It's just one of the many translations. It's not an accurate translation. In fact, in modern Hebrew, there's a different word for prince, right? Now, nasich, but it's sometimes translated that way. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was Judah the prince. I don't know. I just kind of like the word prince, so I just like. But you're right, none of the implications of lineage, except in the sense that I think one of the reasons that translators are friendly to it is because it's like, I don't know, actually, forget it. I was going to say something theological, like God is the king and God's emissaries are the princes, but I don't even know if that's true. It's just one translation.
To answer the second part of your question, if you cut off the head of something, it was believed that therefore you decapitated the whole body. So if the prince represented the entire tribe and you beat him, you are therefore decapitating the entire body.
Interesting. That's such an interesting reading, Florine. That's in other words, the importance of the princes being the officers over the people who were beaten is that shows that the officers were the lead. Who are the people you're going to punish? You're going to punish the leaders, the heads, the thought. There's something about the fact that they took that role and took the beating that showed they were the will of the people and therefore the leaders of the people. That's sort of an interesting backwards way of explaining why that mattered. It actually, one can tell from the fact that they were beaten that they were the leaders. That's okay. But I want to keep throughout this hour, keep searching for what is the relevance of them having been beaten to this appointment that's happening right now, where they are becoming and here I kind of like the regal language, the princes of Israel. Yonatan, and then Hal.
Well, for starters, I think that Rashi's explanation is extremely strained. The whole entire previous Parsha, which actually did use the word neso, right, the same word, names the princes of Israel, or maybe we don't use the word princes, right? But like names who these people are. And Rashi just leapfrogs that, and he names it twice, leapfrogs that and says like, no, it's not those people. It's these other people who are not described in that language. And I think actually my interpretation is quite the opposite of his, is that these are people who came about after the Exodus from Egypt. But the utility of doing that, of imposing this interpretation on the text, I think is to say, you might think that these overseers who were doing the bidding of the Egyptians against the Israelites in Egypt, you might think they were bad people. You might think that these are people that we would reject. But actually, what they did was they stepped up to take our beatings for us and to take responsibility for what the Egyptians commanded us to do and that we couldn't do. And that's why they were elevated into positions of leadership within the Israelite people.
Okay, now we're getting into this, because this particular role, the shotrim, is the one that we have to think about. I again, chosen the word officer, sometimes translated as police or enforcer. That's interesting, you know? And I do mean to kick up some of the connotations we have with the police, just because what is the role, what is the relationship that one has to those people, and would those people eventually become senators and heads of state? And, you know, also, though, this is different. This isn't a regular society with regular police. Like, this is a slave society, and there is a particular job being described here, and it's the job of the slave who has leadership powers. I don't know, privileges, perhaps, but powers to enforce over his brethren, right? And that existed in American slavery, and it existed in the Holocaust. We have a word for that, capos, right? And capo is an insult. Like, you sided with your capo, like people, you know, Jews in the heat of ugly anger will shout it at each other. I've heard that, you serve the enemy or whatever. But on the other hand, that person, and this is also true in both American slavery and in the Holocaust, that person sometimes was able to serve as a kind of intermediary and a go-between. And in this case, to return to Yonatan's comment, in this case, Rashi's saying it was the people who were the heads, it must mean them. And it's important to know they didn't abuse their power. In fact, they took the beatings for us. Okay, so they're good. Now, again, why does that matter? I want to keep pressing on this because Rashi really thinks that matters. Yonatan thinks Rashi kind of pulls this story out of nowhere, but it's a story from the Sifrei, from the Midrash, and Rashi is going to think it really, really matters. So we're going to keep going. Hal or Kathy?
Yeah, so, I mean, my first thought was of capos as well, but I think this whole point that they're being beaten, you know, sort of establishes their street cred. You know, it gives them moral authority, even though they were chosen by the Egyptian taskmasters. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that, you know, in fact, leaders, heads, princes usually don't get the punishment, don't the beatings. In fact, you know, they send out soldiers and they send out, you know, underlings are the ones who get killed, not or killed. I mean, in this case, beaten. But so I don't think, you know, it's so common for heads to be beaten for the
great. Yes. Okay.
Especially ones that were, but then, you know, chosen by Pharaoh or the Egyptians. It's
okay. Okay, good. So thank you. I mean, I sketched out possibilities, but the truth is, Kathy says, I think rightly, if the leader of the people is getting, if the capo, I don't know, that's I don't want to toss that word around, but you know, if the person in that position is getting beaten, something's going wrong from the perspective of the oppressor, right? Because that person's supposed to be servile and doing the will of, performing well, pushing the people. That person's frankly supposed to put in a position where they're being psychologically submitted to torture their own people. That's the ultimate goal here. And if a person is saying, no, I'm defying that, I'll take the beatings, then as Hal says, that person had a quality of self-sacrifice, of compassion, of justice, who knows, but that now we're beginning to see why it might be connected. Maybe the person who said, I will not let my people be punished, I will, fine, beat me, that's already reading a lot into it. But there's an indication there that Rashi may be pointing us to. Now, let me, and then I'll return to the hands that are up. Let me just, for the purposes of time, there's one major chunk of text. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I want you to see pan out here a little bit. This is the text we were just looking at, Exodus chapter 5. And I want you to see that there are a lot of power dynamics going on here that are important to take note of, to have a fuller understanding of who these Shotrim were. Okay, so first of all, this takes place just after Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go, for the first time, right? Let my people go and let them celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness. That's like an interesting story that they don't quite say what they are intending. But let my people go, we're going to celebrate a festival in the wilderness. Maybe we just celebrated that festival, by the way. But Pharaoh said, no, Pharaoh's not into it. There's a conversation there. And then the conversation ends. The king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you distract the people from their tasks? Why are you getting them all excited about this journey into the desert? And Pharaoh continued, the people of the land are already so numerous, and you would have them cease from their labors? You want a vacation? No way. They're going to work. So that's why the same day Pharaoh charged the taskmasters and said, we'll reduce their supplies but they'll have to make the same quota of bricks. Okay, that's to punish them for what Moses and Aaron did, which is challenging Pharaoh's authority directly. So then the taskmasters and officers, and we read this paragraph, but I want to just highlight here the words that are different. Taskmasters, these presumably are Egyptian taskmasters, Nokshe Ha'am, although it doesn't say that, but that's the presumption, and Vishotrav, and its officers. Okay, two different words, taskmasters, presumably Pharaoh's hired or conscripted overseers, and then these presumably, at least in Rashi's reading, are members of our own tribe who are now working with the taskmasters. And look at how this works. We read this, but just the taskmasters pressed them saying, you gotta complete the work. And let's not think that the taskmasters are also not living in a place of terror, right? Probably they also are afraid of Pharaoh. And then the officers are beaten because they didn't. Okay, what happens to the people themselves, not as clear. But here's where things get really interesting in that story. The officers of the Israelites came to Pharaoh and cried, why do you deal thus with your servants? It's not fair. No straw is issued to your servants, yet they demand of us make bricks. Thus your servants are being beaten when the fault is with your own people. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's not the overseers, the taskmasters, the officers, the ones who were beaten, came to Pharaoh. They had access to Pharaoh and they said, this is not fair. Your people, your taskmasters are not providing us with material, and now we're being beaten for it. That's not fair. Well, Pharaoh's not a good person, so that's not going to work, right? He said, shirkers. That's why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the eternal. Now, wait a minute. Did you catch that? There's something weird happened there. Pharaoh said, you're shirkers. You want to run away from work, nirfim, and that's why you said, let us go and sacrifice to the eternal. But they didn't say that. Moses and Aaron said that, right? So now their role here is really like starting to get complicated. They can talk to Pharaoh. They're under Pharaoh's oppressors. They are beaten as a result of it, but they are kind of blamed for what Moses and Aaron are doing, I don't know, outside of the whole power structure. Okay, and Pharaoh says, absolutely not, no way, keep doing your work. And then just the last thing I want to read here is that the officers of the Israelites, this is an amazing scene. The officers of the Israelites found themselves in trouble because of the order, you must not reduce your daily quantity of the bricks. And they're the ones that get beaten. As they left Pharaoh's presence, they came upon Moses and Aaron standing in their path. Unbelievable. Such a weird thing. Imagine that. Like, are they working together, or do they see themselves as allies? Or is it just like, oh, you have an appointment at this time too? Hi, Moses and Aaron. What are you doing here? Right? And they said to them, may the eternal, may God look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, or his servants, putting a sword in their hands to slay us. And Moses is not happy. Moses is like, this is not working, is the end of that scene. But okay, there's a lot of intricate drama there that we usually just breeze past, because Parshat Shemot has like an entire epic tale in like 3 chapters. But there's a lot going on there. What's happened? Who are these officers? And what, again, now these are the people that Rashi is imagining are negotiating, interacting with Pharaoh back then. These are the people that are now being appointed as princes or as leaders of the people. Okay, why does that matter to Rashi? Let's take a couple more comments, and then we're going to go look at another Rashi. So Alexandra and then Jen.
My first thought when looking at the first text you showed us that said like princes, leaders several times, is that when someone who is in a position of leadership, when you call them a leader, like that CEO, he's a leader. Like, it's such a redundant statement, but it means like he's a good leader. Like he is ethical, he is wise, he knows how to motivate and empower and does things the right way, or he's a prince among men, or all of those kinds of phrases. And so looking at it, if we buy Rashi's statement that these are the same people, I think, I just like thinking that the leaders were real leaders at the time, and that the Torah was making a point of saying that. But also, so if they are these people that Rashi is talking about in Egypt, I think it's also like they cursed Moshe and Aaron, our 2 biggest leaders, but it's important to know that they were working with limited context. They didn't know Moshe and Aaron's like game plan. They didn't know God's game plan. And so I think it's an important sort of note. Forgive them. They were doing their best for the people. And also they were beaten and they've experienced deep trauma, and they had the choice to either let that roll downhill or to use it to have more compassion, to be leaders, and they chose the latter. That's interesting. So you're reading this backstory, the insertion of this backstory, as a kind of like attempt to address potential ambivalence that we might have with their leadership. That is, once we connect them back to the taskmasters, that makes them problematic characters, but don't worry, they were beaten. So actually it's not just they took one for the team, but they had it hard, and we should have sympathy for them. And it was a complicated, they suffered. It alleviates them of some of the questions of like, how complicit were you in all of this? All right, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, narratively, I kind of don't want to relieve them of that because it makes the story and the bookend of it more interesting, right? Because they said, like, why are you doing these sacrifices? They're making it bad. And then the piece that we started with was, and now they're called up to make this sacrifice. And it makes it seem so much like an act of reconciliation, potentially with the people and especially with God. And I just really love that, in part because I am thinking of them in terms of like police and current stuff where we have to talk about, can you create a new society or reform a system through personal responsibility by finding the individuals who are responsible and having an accounting with them? Or do you have to start in a way that just completely reforms your relationship with people who collaborated or who were part of that system to begin with?
Okay.
And I think that's just such a vital question.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm like, I so appreciate these last couple of comments, and I'm like seeing, like, these are different interpretations than the classic one that that I might have offered. And this last version of it, I mean, that is to say, both Alexandra and Jen are interested in the ways that these officers have positions of power, and there's some question as to how you get a position of power in a slave society. And Alexandra points out, and they're challenging the revolutionaries, which, like, you know, on the one hand, understandable. On the other hand, the revolution worked. I mean, those are our heroes, Moses and Aaron. Like, aren't our sympathy supposed to be with them? And the way that the Jen narrated it's like very intriguing to me. It's like imagine that they were, we can imagine a lot of things, but imagine that they were corrupt in some way, that they had seized some, or not even corrupt, but that they had taken some kind of power, they had taken some kind of advantage. But you know what? It turned out, they ended up being brutalized, and they get it now. They understand, and maybe they get it better than we do, what power is and how power can corrupt, and what it means to be negotiating with forces of brutality, and how there's no taking advantage in that system. It never ends up working for you. In the end, you will be beaten because you're not the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh will beat everyone one day, sooner or later. So I like that. I mean, I must say, and I just want to articulate it so it's out there, that the more kind of classic, the one I expected from the group, was like, oh, they were so noble. They took one for the team, right? I'm using Jonathan's phrasing, and they understand human suffering on a deeper level. They are the most noble. They are, I call this class officers of mercy. They had mercy on the people. And that's how they operated, and they showed themselves actually to be, they showed themselves to be worthy leaders because, here, let's take a look, just by way of saying this, and I'll open it up again. Let's take a look at the next Rashi, because this is the game that I wanted to play with you, which is that what you do is, all right, this is a good way to learn Rashi. So just like if you're interested in like a form of limud, a form of learning that like allows you to kind of really get to know Torah commentary, what you might do is, look, Rashi we looked at said, oh, these were the officers. I'm connecting this to this verse in Exodus, right? So we went and we looked at that verse in Exodus, and the officers of the Israelites whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them were beaten. Why? They were asked, did you not complete the prescribed amount of bricks either yesterday or today as you did before? So what do you do now? Go look at what Rashi said. What did Rashi say here? Because Rashi looked at the entire Torah, okay? So Rashi jumped us from Numbers to Exodus. What does Rashi say here? Well, what Rashi says here is much the same thing. And the officers of the children of Israel were beaten. These are his, I should have bolded this, were beaten. The officers were Israelites, Hashochim Israelim Hayu, and they had pity on their fellows and did not press them. Okay, that he uses the word chasim. They had pity. They would turn the bricks over to the taskmasters who were Egyptians, and when something was missing from the required amount, the Egyptians would whip them because they did not press the workers. Okay, that's Rashi's description of it. Now, we know that. We saw that. Rashi, that's from the Sifrei. Rashi brought that, but this is now Rashi just sort of using his own language to describe it. Okay, and in Rashi's version, it's more like what I was expecting from you. They're so noble, they didn't press them, they had pity. You all are already offering more complex versions that takes into account the ways that they might have had a complex situation, a complex reckoning to deal with, and maybe even a complex journey. Okay, now check this out. okay, as we surf our way from Rashi to Rashi. Check this out. Okay, there in Exodus, Rashi repeats this same idea. Oh, they were, and by the way, do you know what's bothering Rashi? What's bothering Rashi here is that it's not, sorry. The distinction between Israelites and Egyptians, and clarifying that these Shotrim were the Israelites and the Nogshim were the taskmasters. But then Rashi goes on to say, therefore, those officers merited to become the Sanhedrin. Now, this is the high court of ancient Israel, okay? And some of the spirit that was upon Moses was taken and placed upon them. As it says, gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, those whom you know. That is, you know the good that they did in Egypt, for they are the elders of the people and its officers. Okay. Sorry, it was a little convoluted the way I explained it, but let me just say it clearly. Rashi repeats the idea that these were the officers that had pity. And we saw Rashi name those as the leaders of Israel. And Rashi goes forward now and says more than that, which is these same leaders went on to become the first court of Israel. What does it mean after all that we said princes? Are they princes? They're not princes. Those people, the princes that we're seeing represent the tribes, are going to go on to form the Sanhedrin, the first high court of Israel. Remember I said we're told in Deuteronomy to appoint judges and officers, shoftim v'shotrim. What Rashi claims here is that the former officers become the judges. Okay? Not just are given an honorary position of leadership, but the former officers, the ones that were beaten, they become the eventual high court of Israel, the Supreme Court. Now, now we've gotten a whole new kind of statement on the nature of justice and wisdom and how wisdom might adjudicate power. Okay, so now I wonder what you think about what Rashi's done so far, which is to link the princes to those earlier officers, but also to say those officers eventually become the judges of society, the ones who make the laws. Okay, why? Why is this so important to Rashi? Rashi's now mentioned it twice. David Kurtz and then Wendy Becker.
Two disclaimers. The first one, I came in late, so I'm sorry for making a point that somebody else made. And I'm not sure where I'm going with this is the other one. But I immediately went back to the stories before. What made Moses, Egyptian into Israelite, was the beating of watching him, the Egyptian beat the slave, and him taking justice into his own hands, deciding that that was the wrong thing to do. And that's how Moses became Moses. So there is something about learning a lesson there that seems like it might be an eternal kind of thing. Also, the thing that Pharaoh probably learned is that, gosh, there's so many of these people, and one of my own his blood is thicker than water. So maybe I better put an intermediary in between there too. So I go back to the beginning of this whole thing where Moses became an Israelite.
That's great. That's a great connection, because at that moment where Moses goes and sees people being beaten and realizes like there's something wrong in this society, tells us that there's some theme here in the Torah that experiencing being witnessed to in that case, because Moses was free of it. He was living in the palace, like being confronted with brutality, officers doing brutal things to people in the open, in the streets. It shocks you into, whoa, something's wrong with the whole system. Okay. And then we're being asked to consider, what is it like to be in the system and to experience that brutality? this is a complicated thing, right? Because Moses has the privilege of being in the palace. Then there are slaves who are just beaten. Like they have no recourse whatsoever. And then there are these like intermediary figures who, and you know, Rashi, I think what Rashi's looking for here is, and they just put themselves in the line of fire. And that's a legit, you know, they were, dare I say, good cops, you know, but it isn't cops really. Again, it's this strange role of like being negotiating, having a low level of power in an oppressive power structure. Rashi wants that to be like, wow, they took it on, and they were wise and compassionate people from the start. But we have offered, Alexandra and Jen have offered us a different kind of reading, which is that, and maybe David's comments fit into this too, that, you know, maybe actually you do soak up the benefits of power for a while. Like maybe part of the learning is that you want to get something from power. You want to like have a certain kind of status that protects you or might give you extra benefit. Who knows what they did? But at a certain point, they learned. At a certain point, either they changed and started taking the beatings, or they were beaten anyway, and they realized, my God, there's no way to. It's complicated. We're not going to unravel, I think, today and in the next 10 minutes. But Moses and Aaron were doing one thing, the Shotrim were doing another. Who was doing the wise thing? Were Moses and Aaron endangering the people through their revolutionary activities? Like, were these claims legitimate? What was the relationship between the Nogshim and the Shotrim? There's a lot going on here. But suffice it to say, this idea that you could have been embedded in the power structure and suffered in it, and then go on to have a totally different perspective on justice. So much so that we want you on the Supreme Court. That's an interesting suggestion. Wendy and then Marianka.
So going along in those lines, I think that this is exactly why they were chosen to be judges. I think what may be being said here is that justice, to understand what justice is, having gone through the experience of being beaten, to know what that is like, as well as to know how to speak up, as well as to know how to speak on a level you're speaking as a leader. So it's the whole gamut, going from prisoner to police, to know that is knowing justice because of what they suffered. They can understand the ramifications of their decisions because of that. And I think it also, it reminds me of the Hasidic, the teachings that those who have been in the darkest places, those who have been in the depths of despair and true depression, also, and in wrongdoing, their redemption, their closeness to God is greater. That when we go through these tough experiences in life, that is what can give us greater wisdom on the intellectual, on the emotional, on the spiritual level, because of that experience of knowing all sides of experiences of life.
I think you're right in naming Rashi's. I think you're naming well Rashi's sensibility here. I think Rashi wants us to see that. I mean, to say that that you're on the Sanhedrin is a big deal. Like, for the rabbis like Rashi, it's like it's not about kings and queens. It's about judges and legal interpreters, right? To say you have that wisdom, that knowledge, that's a big deal to be a wise judge in our tradition. And sometimes we call our leaders judges because that title has such as to judge the people wisely. And I think Rashi is like on a basic level, I think Rashi is saying, look, the whole story of Egypt is it bequeaths us a compassion principle. That's the center of our religion. Rabbi Brous articulates this very well. We were slaves in Egypt, so we must bring justice into the world because we know what it's like.
Right.
So now, if that's the compassion principle, then kal v'chomer, then all the more so with these shotrim, who were the people that this is the description of the brutality that we have. They're the ones that took beatings. So they really know what it's like to suffer. And that makes them all the more, all the wiser. I don't mean to say suffering makes you wise. Not just that simple, but they have a greater sense of urgency around the need to bring justice in the world because they experienced injustice and the brutality of the state. Okay, so I think that is definitely what the big picture of what Rashi is trying to suggest by saying to us, these people were our leaders then because they were compassionate, they suffered for it, and we're honoring them now. And then eventually, forget about honor, eventually they're going to sit on the high court because those are the people we want thinking through issues of justice in our society. Okay, I want to take you to one more place, but let's see if we can squeeze in a couple more comments. Marianka?
I have a question which is sort of outside the discussion, but how do these judges we're talking about today, or leaders or chieftains, relate to the judges from Parsha Yitro, who are, you shall seek from out among the people capable men who fear God, trustworthy men who spurn ill-gotten gains, set them over as chiefs of thousands and hundreds, and let them judge the people at all times.
Yeah, right.
Is there any relationship between those?
I want to just say that's exactly the right kind of thinking. I'm on my feet right now. I don't feel like I can say anything, but that's worth investigating. Like how Rashi is synthesizing a bunch of different stories here where there are, I mean, one of the overarching questions, what were the power structures in this society? When did they emerge? Were there some in slave days? And then, yes, at a certain point, Moses is appointing, people to adjudicate. So are those the same folks? Whatever, I mean, part of the question that we have to ask there is that system that Yitro is setting up, is it the same as the later system, the Sanhedrin and the judges that God calls for? And I think usually the working assumption is that it's not. It's an earlier working version of it. And meaning because Yitro comes before Sinai, according to some accounts. It's a working version of it. It's a temporary version of it, but the official Sanhedrin, that's a different system. But I don't know. There's a lot of good work to be done in thinking about that overlap. Speaking of which, this is the last stop that I want to take you on today. There are, as Marianka notes, there are many stories of, get these people to judge or rule or help, and we just heard about one of them in that last comment of Rashi's. We heard about the gathering of the elders, right? Rashi says, these officers became the Sanhedrin. What is the idea? Where does the idea of the Sanhedrin come from? It comes from Numbers chapter 11. Read this next week. Gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, those whom you know. The 70 there is language that we borrow from to form the idea of a Sanhedrin, a high court of 70 people, 71 people to have a tiebreaker. But let's do the same thing that we did before. Remember our game. If Rashi connects us to a verse, we go to that verse, and let's take a look at what Rashi says on that verse. This is the verse that Rashi means. Then the Eternal said to Moses, gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, those whom you know. And this is going to be the phrase that I'm sort of saying it all out because we're racing here. But this phrase, those whom you know, is the phrase that Rashi is going to be interested in or curious about. How do you know them? For they are the elders of the people and its officers. So Rashi is right. Rashi has a proof text there. It's officers. The elders are the officers. So very, very good, Rashi. That's very, very good. Very, very good midrash before him. Notice this connection. Okay. But there's a problem. What's the problem? What's bothering Rashi? What's bothering Rashi is that there were already elders. Earlier on, we already heard about elders. So listen to this. Actually, why don't I just show you first? Exodus chapter 3, go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the eternal, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me and said, I've taken note of you and what's being done to you in Egypt. So there already were elders and they get gathered, by the way, same language. So what are these new elders being gathered here? Okay, this is the last problem we're going to look at today, but take a look at what Rashi says. Gather to me. And where were the original elders, Rashi wonders? Weren't there elders back in Egypt who sat with Moses and Aaron, as it says there, go gather the elders of Israel? We just looked at that. But they died just before this in the fire at Taverah. We just read about a big fire that broke out. And they died. They were punished, those elders. Why? They were punished because at Mount Sinai, they saw God, it says, but they were behaving carelessly, like someone munching his bread while speaking to the king. That is what it means when it says there that they ate and drank. Okay, and here's the verse. That Moses and Aaron and Nadav and Avihu and the 70 elders of Israel ascended to Mount Sinai, and they saw the God of Israel under, et cetera, and they ate and drank. That's a weird little phrase at the end. And what Rashi is saying about it is that they were the elders of Israel. They had special privileges. They ascended to God. They were on Mount Sinai. And what did they do with that privilege? They benefited from it. They took food and drink. They found perks, indulgences. Those elders, they were the elders of Israel, but they saw it as a cushy job. Those aren't the people we want on the high court. The people who love power and status, those aren't the people we want on the high court. The people we want on the high court are people that know what we have been through, that have been through it themselves, that understand what the consequences are of adjudicating injustice. They know what it means to have to contain power because they suffered from it themselves. And how they got there, I don't know. We can debate how complicated their story was, how complicit they were all along. But somewhere along the line, they suffered under the hands of the oppressor, and that brings wisdom and it brings urgency, a sense of urgency to the need for justice. So that's worth thinking about. All right. Great being with you all. May our Torah be a healing to the world. Love you all. See you next week.